On paper, the Piper Cherokee had everything right. Low wing, all metal, 4 seats. A Lycoming engine sitting up front, turning a prop that could split a man in half if he walked into it careless. A price tag that put it inside reach of the working pilot who had been priced out of everything else Piper made. In 1960, Piper's engineers called it the Cherokee. The market called it a revolution. 32,778 of them later, the market calls it something else entirely. That number does not fit the story most people know about the Cherokee. Was the punchline always in the design, or did it take 60 years for anyone to say so out loud? Subscribe to Sky Ranch for more forensic aviation. We crack open what the brochure will not show you. The Cherokee was not born from ambition, it was born from pressure. By the late 1950s, Cessna owned the trainer market. The Cessna 172 had been in production since 1955. It was building toward what would eventually become 44,000 units, the most produced aircraft in history. Piper's single-engine flagship, the PA-28 Comanche, was fast and well-regarded, but it cost too much to manufacture to compete at the price point where Cessna lived. So Piper did what manufacturing companies do when the market punishes their best product. They built a cheaper one. Carl Berge, Fred Weick, and John Thorpe got the assignment. Weick was Piper's director of engineering at the Vero Beach Development Center. He had spent his career trying to build aircraft that were structurally honest about what they were doing. He pushed for a 44-inch cabin, wide enough for 4 adults to sit without their shoulders pressing the interior panels. Piper management said no. The Comanche had a 44-inch cabin. If the Cherokee matched it, pilots shopping the Comanche would look at the cheaper airplane and make the obvious choice. The conference room narrowed the cabin to 42 inches to protect the revenue on the more expensive model. The Cherokee arrived in the world already designed to be second. Before we go further, the record deserves to be stated plainly. The PA-28 Cherokee received Federal Aviation Administration type certification in 1960. Production started in 1961. Piper delivered the 500th Cherokee within 3 months of the 250th, one of the fastest production ramp rates in general aviation history. The 1000th rolled out in spring 1963. These numbers come from the AOPA published Cherokee fact sheet, sourced from Piper production records. By any measure, the Cherokee was not a failure. It was exactly what Piper needed it to be, a volume product that kept the company solvent while Cessna dominated the premium market. Those are not marketing claims. Those are production records from the AOPA Cherokee fact sheet drawn directly from Piper's factory logs. For a company trying to survive against a competitor with a 6-year head start, those numbers were the difference between bankruptcy and another decade of operation. What Piper did not publish. Fred Weick's 44-inch cabin request is documented in General Aviation News, sourced from Terry Lee Rogers' book, The Cherokee Tribe. Weick lost the argument. The 2-inch difference was not an engineering call, it was a margin protection decision made by people who were not engineers. The airplane that trained half of America's pilots was narrower than its lead engineer wanted, for a reason that had nothing to do with aerodynamics. The cabin width was the first compromise. It was not the last. The airplane Piper delivered in 1961 was, on paper, competitive. The PA-28 150 weighed 1,400 pounds empty and carried a gross weight of 2,150 pounds, a useful load that worked fine for 2 people and luggage. The 150 horsepower Lycoming 0320 was a proven engine with a 2,000-hour time between overhauls. Fuel burn at cruise ran 7 to 8 gallons an hour. Range on the standard 36-gallon tank was approximately 435 nautical miles. Those are trainer numbers, honest numbers. The Cherokee 140 and 150 were designed for flight schools, not for cross-country owners, and those numbers reflect that purpose accurately. The complaints came later, when pilots tried to use a trainer for what the brochure implied it could do with 4 people aboard. On the ramp, none of the conference room history showed. The PA-28 was a clean airplane. Low wing, which gave it better crosswind handling than the high-wing Cessna by centering the fuselage mass closer to the ground. Tricycle gear with a steerable nose wheel. A single door on the right side accessed by stepping up on the wing root. The Lycoming was docile. The stall behavior on the original rectangular wing was tame. The Hershey Bar Wing, named for its resemblance to a flat candy bar, broke cleanly with almost no tendency to roll off in either direction. Students learned on it because it forgave the mistakes that students make. The low wing configuration that gave the Cherokee its crosswind advantage was the same layout that made it harder to see the runway on the base leg. The wing blocked the downward view. Students trained to compensate. Cessna pilots looked straight down through the high wing at the runway below them. Cherokee pilots looked through the windshield and learned to judge from a different angle. Flight schools bought them by the hangarful. The airplane built an industry. And then the Punchline started forming. The Hershey Bar Wing nickname started in the community as a description, not an insult. The constant chord rectangular planform had real advantages. It was simple to manufacture. It was predictable in the stall. The whole wing breaks at roughly the same angle of attack from root to tip, which means the departure happened in front of the pilot rather than rolling away from him. For a training aircraft, that was a feature. Students making mistakes in slow flight got a warning they could feel before the situation became unrecoverable. What the wing did not do well was glide. Pull the throttle to idle on a Cherokee 6, the 6-seat PA-32 variant with a 300 horsepower Lycoming IO 540 up front, and the glide ratio drops to approximately 7:1. Pilots who have timed the descent confirm numbers as bad as 1.16 nautical miles per 1,000 feet of altitude lost. The space shuttle landed at 4.5:1. The Cherokee 6 is not meaningfully better. The pilot community settled on one phrase for it that required no dictionary: powered manhole cover. Pull the power and the ground arrives ahead of schedule. Piper knew the wing had characteristics. In 1974, they replaced it. The Warrior came out with a semi-tapered wing and a 2-foot longer wingspan. The stated reason was improved stall behavior. The unstated reason, documented in the pilot community for decades, was aesthetics. Cessna's tapered wing looked modern on the ramp. Piper's marketing team wanted the Warrior to compete on appearance, not just mechanics. Here is what Piper did not put in the press release when the new wing shipped. John Thorpe, one of the 3 men who designed the original Cherokee, went on record against the 1974 redesign. His statement was specific. Tapered wings stall outboard, losing lift at the tips before the root. When the tip goes first, aileron effectiveness drops at the moment recovery demands it most. The risk of rolling off into a spin during a stall recovery increases. The man who laid out the original Cherokee design told the aviation world that Piper's updated wing carried a departure risk the original Hershey Bar did not. Thorpe's objection was not theoretical. He understood wing aerodynamics from first principles and had seen what tip stall does to a pilot who is already behind the aircraft. The outboard stall took aileron authority away at the exact moment the pilot needed to arrest the roll. If the student was slow and scared and pulled back against the instinct to push, the tapered wing gave them less to work with than the Hershey Bar would have. Piper shipped it anyway. The performance data bore Thorpe out in a quiet way. Documented takeoff distance, cruise speed, and landing distance for same horsepower. Cherokees with different wing types are nearly identical in published testing. Some performance gains in later tapered wing models traced to better seals and fairings applied during the same production update, not to the wing geometry itself. The Warrior did not fly meaningfully better than the airplane it replaced. It looked better from 50 feet away. That is the pattern the Cherokee's reputation runs on. Design choices made in conference rooms over the objections of the engineers who built the original delivered to pilots who were told the update was a step forward. The fuel selector is the most documented example of the pattern. A Cessna 172 has a fuel selector with a both position. Set it, and the engine draws from both tanks at once. The pilot does not manage fuel in normal cruise. The system absorbs the workload. A Piper Cherokee has two positions on the fuel selector: left, right. The pilot must switch tanks on a schedule. Fly the left side too long and it runs dry. Pull the throttle back on short final and discover the engine does not respond. The selector points at an empty tank. The other wing carries full fuel the engine cannot reach. The NTSB accident database documents the pattern across decades of reports. The sequence is consistent. Pilot selects a tank, forgets to switch, engine fails at low altitude with no recovery options remaining. In 2021, an accident in Gypsum, Colorado produced an NTSB probable cause of fuel starvation. The pilot stated he ran the left tank too long without switching. The left wing separated from the fuselage on impact with a fence post. The fuel selector design had not changed since 1961. Researcher Ron Wantaja analyzed general aviation accident data from 2001 through 2010 across the registered fleets of the Cessna 172 and PA-28. The Cessna 172's overall accident rate was 50% higher than the Cherokee's across that period. Cherokee pilots crash less by fleet share, but the Cherokee's fatal accident rate in the same study ran 40% higher than the 172's. Airfax Journal summarized the finding: Cherokee pilots who crashed died more often. The fuel mismanagement pattern was a documented contributor. The 172's both position was not. Piper had the Cessna solution available. A third detent on a fuel selector is almost nothing to manufacture. The decision to use left and right only was a simplification decision. Cheaper to build, less to certify. The airplane that costs less to buy also costs less to produce in ways that transferred the workload from the parts bin to the pilot. Does the Cherokee earn its punchline status, or did Cessna just win the marketing war? Tell us in the comments. The single door followed the same logic. One door, passenger side only. No door on the pilot's left. Step over the wing to get in. In an emergency egress from a post-crash fire, one exit exists. Aviation forums have documented fatalities in single-door aircraft where the pilot could not exit before the fire ended the question. Experienced owner pilots, familiar with the configuration, the door count still mattered. The Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association published its Cherokee 140 guide with a cons section that names 3 items: underpowered, rear seats suited only for small children or dogs, one door. That is not a competitor's press release. That is the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association describing Piper's own entry-level product to pilots considering buying it. The Cherokee 140 cannot legally carry 4 average American adults with full tanks. The useful load runs 860 to 920 pounds. Fill the tanks and add 4 adults, and the aircraft is over gross weight before the door closes. Piper addressed this in a way that reveals the design philosophy. The standard fuel capacity was listed at 36 gallons. 50 gallons was an option, offered specifically to discourage overloading by making the default tank too small for 4 adults and full bags. The entry-level Cherokee was built expecting pilots to leave fuel behind. The market absorbed all of it. The Cherokee kept selling and kept training. It did its job. The institution behind it could not do the same. By 1989, industry-wide general aviation piston sales had fallen to 1,143 aircraft for the entire year. Cessna and Beechcraft had already stopped making small pistons. Piper kept going. In February 1990, Piper furloughed 1,600 employees as bankruptcy rumors circulated openly. In July 1991, the company filed Chapter 11. The numbers said Piper should have been solvent. The company had $100 million in back orders. It had $75 million in assets against $47 million in liabilities. It had $1,000 in the bank. Product liability insurance premiums had made it impossible to borrow the capital needed to fill those back orders. No insurer would cover the Cherokee family at a cost the company could sustain. The airplane that trained half of America's pilots was, by its 30th year, financially uninsurable at a premium compatible with operating. Charles Summer started at Piper in 1976 as a riveter. He would later become its president. He told Florida Trend what the cash position looked like when the filing happened: $1,000. Piper emerged in 1995 as New Piper Aircraft after a $95 million acquisition. The Cherokee family continued in production. The Warrior and Archer kept appearing at flight schools next to the 172, priced roughly 25% lower at equivalent specifications. That gap is not a coincidence. It is the Cherokee's foundational identity, built into the airplane in 1958 when Piper's management decided the cabin should be 42 inches wide and not 44. The Comanche had 44 inches. The Comanche needed to justify its price. Fred Weick wanted 2 more inches. He did not get them. The conference room was the designer of record. The punchline was never culture. The pilots who flew Cherokees and generated the nicknames Hershey Bar, Brick, Powered Manhole Cover were not writing insults for sport. They were making engineering assessments with their hands on the controls. They felt the wing drop power off. They switched tanks because the Selector gave them no other option. They climbed over the wing because the other door did not exist and nobody was going to add one. The scorn was accurate. The design supplied the vocabulary. 32,778 aircraft later, the Cherokee is still in production. Pilots still train in it. Some love it, and that love is not wrong. The crosswind handling is real, the trim stability is genuine, the price is honest about what the airplane is. The airplane Fred Weick tried to build would have been better. The airplane Piper built kept the company alive for 30 years before it ran out of money to continue. The most produced piston trainer that never became what its engineers wanted it to be is also the most produced piston trainer that never quite became what Cessna feared it would. That is the Cherokee's real record, not a failure, a very expensive second place. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe to Sky Ranch.